Hello, I'm Brian Calley, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan, and you're watching the Small Business Briefing. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm actually I'm doing a lot of moving around the state these days, and find myself in Rochester today, but don't want to miss the Small Business Briefing. A bunch of stuff that is still happening. I'm joined today by Sarah Miller, who is my partner in this endeavor in the Small Business Briefing. And Sarah, you had mentioned, I think last week, or was it the week before, that you got your COVID test in the mail. I actually got an email from the post office, from the United States Postal Service today, saying that by the end of this week, I should get mine, which were ordered on the very first day that they were made available. So I guess we should count our blessings that the United States Post Office does not handle organ transplants, because this was really quite a long process. We're going to see when we get to the numbers in a few minutes that we're kind of, we kind of missed the place where these tests would have been most effective, perhaps. But yet, it was nice, I guess, to get the notice that they're about to come.
It is interesting. There's several of us who have been tracking the receipt of our test, and a lot of us got them over a week ago. And I was just talking to a few around the office here today who have not received them either. So definitely a mixed results here. But before we get into the numbers, we are going to thank our sponsor, Marana Group. Marana Group is a family-owned small business located in Kalamazoo, and you should consider them for customized, engineered solutions that will meet your unique needs. So if you're looking for something in the data document distribution area, please reach out to Marana Group. So like Brian said, it's Data Monday. We're going to talk about the latest numbers, which I think are trending in the correct direction. So Brian, what's the latest?
So we have a couple of, I'm actually going to start with a different subject. We're going to get into the COVID numbers in just a minute, but just in looking at, around the developed world, consider the Western world, if you will, the inflation has been a problem across the board. I thought this was an interesting graph, so you can see the U.S. is higher, but not alone in seeing inflation increasing. But I'm actually hopeful now because the Build Back Better plan looks stalled, monetary policy starting to return to normal, that we're going to see inflation start to level off. So hopefully it stays that way. But at the same time, we're seeing and this is from Gallup here, who does daily tracking of public opinions on a myriad of different issues. And you'll see here that the share of Americans who rate the U.S. economic conditions as excellent or good is down pretty low. In fact, what's really struck out to me is it's at 18% here, is that's lower than it was in the spring of 2020. When the lockdowns were very new and the uncertainty was very high, so it's interesting to me that it's actually lower than before. But look at that pandemic impact. I mean, what a sharp drop in how people are feeling about the overall economic conditions here in our country. Just looking at the numbers, all heading in the right direction. So here's now we're looking at the regionals, and they're all going down. A while ago, it looked like, maybe the West was kind of lagging going down, and it was a little bit, but everything heading straight down. So all looking good. This is just the last 90 days for the nation. And this is, so it's all good news, coming down almost as fast as it went up. And we see hospitalizations, again, nationwide coming down. And you see each individual day is lower than the 7-day average. So we know that it's continuing to fall. Very welcome news. Here's Michigan. Michigan's numbers are a little bit odd because we had that Christmas drop when the testing dropped, but got to take that out of the mix. You see the rise up and the rise down are pretty impressive. So clearly we're on the other side of the Omicron wave, but this is the most important one, which is hospitalizations. And you see hospitalizations coming down now too. And this is pretty welcome. Our hospitals have been under a lot of strain. Just anecdotally with hospitals around the area, they're feeling these numbers coming down. And but what happens is that when the numbers are high like that, it backs up a lot of things. So it takes a long time for the healthcare system to regain its footing after the numbers are really high. But hopefully these continue to drop and drop very quickly, kind of getting the healthcare system back to its normal self. Just to give an idea too, I mean, the healthcare industry in Michigan is massive. In Oakland County, there's more people in the healthcare industry than any other industry, including automotive. So it's big, and it's big and growing in a lot of places, including in West Michigan. So this is definitely a welcome sight. So really short update today, because really it's just the same as last week, only another week of trends going in the right direction. So I would classify this as good, but especially seeing the hospital numbers start to fall more precipitously, that is great news.
It is great news. I look forward to watching it decline even further. So even though the numbers are declining, we still have some institutions out there with rules in place. We have, for instance, travel mask mandates if you're on an airplane or a train. Some private institutions still have certain rules out there. I know I was able to go see a theater performance yesterday, and vaccine cards and masks were required. So as we start to come out of this surge and move into the endemic phase of COVID, what can we expect in terms of those rules going forward?
Well, I think that you're going to see throughout the spring, so between early spring and late spring, you're going to see some of those start to back off. But the ones that are mandated by the federal government, I think really late spring is the earliest that we could hope. So, for example, with airline travel, I think late spring is the earliest that we can hope for in terms of getting to a point where it's where they start to back off on some of the rules, the travel restrictions. Of course, some of those are in other countries, so it's their rules if you go to those other countries, and some coming back here to the U.S. And these things, well, they might seem reasonable and modest, but when you add it all up, it just has an impact in the ease of moving people and goods and things. So as you think about supply chains, that these types of rules matter quite a bit. I don't think we're going to see any big wide-scale changes in the more immediate future. I think really the springtime is when that'll happen. The virus, at least in this country, last couple of years, has proven to be kind of a low point, and I think politically speaking, it's going to be an opportunity for the federal government to kind of move away from some of the things that they have been doing lately. They lost in court on the part of the vaccine mandate, but remember, for federal contractors and for their own employees, there's still some rules there. You see schools and universities, they have still have rules, and of course healthcare. So in each of these cases, I think that you won't see any big immediate changes, but by the time we head out of this spring and reach that normal kind of lull or low point in the numbers, then it'll be an opportunity for a lot of different types of organizations to reevaluate where they're at. And I wouldn't be surprised if you saw a lot of them falling away. And by the way, I also just looking at what's happening in other states. We do not have a statewide mask mandate for schools, for example, in Michigan. Some other states still have that, but New Jersey, for example, just today, the governor there had said that he's lifting the mask mandate for schools. Now, individual schools will still make their decisions on what to do, but we're seeing more and more signs that that even on the left side of the political spectrum, that there's kind of an acceptance that it really is time to move on. The other thing is that there is this election coming up, and so you find that, and I don't mean this to be a knock or anything, it's just the reality of it. People who run for office respond to the sentiments of the general public, at least in election years they do. And I think that that's another force, the way that people have kind of moved away from wanting to be so careful. You're going to see the elected people who are in a position to make these decisions move with the general public in a year like this. So we've already seen that, clearly have already seen that here in Michigan in terms of the way that this last wave was handled compared to previous. But I think that you're going to start to see that more across the whole country the closer we get to primary elections and the general election.
And some of that shift definitely comes from us learning as we go. And there was a recent study from Johns Hopkins that suggests the actions taken in March and April 2020 with those more strict lockdowns may not have actually benefited the country.
Yeah, Johns Hopkins it's like they're the keeper of the stats. So, if you want to know what was going on with COVID, that was a really important place to go to. And they had everything around the country, around the world, and then getting it down to the county level. Really, really impressive work that they have done throughout the entire pandemic. But they also looked at, because they have all this data, in the areas where they had the lockdowns, meaning actually closing businesses and restricting businesses, what difference did it make? Now, we're not talking about masks here. We're not talking about COVID protocols. We're not talking about health screening. We're not talking about vaccines. All we're talking about is a mandated closure of businesses. Did the lockdowns work? And in the stay-at-home orders. And the conclusion is no, that it was a 0.2% difference. And when you consider the overall impact that that it had in terms of disruption and everything from domestic violence to depression, suicide, all these things that they'd considered when they pulled all this aggregate data together, that on a net basis, it was a loss, not a gain, to take those actions. Now, we knew that early on because we could see it in the state's own numbers, that the outbreaks weren't happening at workplaces, because workplaces are structured places. Workplaces are the areas where the different protocols and risk mitigation measures are more likely to be taken. And so we often made the case, so the work is probably the safest place that people are in their lives during those times. So there's it's something we kind of felt, we kind of knew before, but having the Johns Hopkins study out, I thought was pretty telling. And one other thing that I wanted to share was that was a quote, because sometimes I worry, like I've kind of characterized my reading of it, but I pulled a direct quote that I thought was very unambiguous. We find little to no evidence that mandated lockdowns in Europe and the United States had a noticeable effect on COVID-19 mortality rates. And so they're really looking at, people that got seriously ill. And then they went on to say the orders, quote, contributed to reducing economic activity, raising unemployment, reducing schooling, causing political unrest, contributing to domestic violence, and undermining liberal democracy. Really pretty. I was kind of surprised at the strength of the conclusions that they were stated in such unambiguous ways. And the good news is that the entire political system that makes these policy decisions seems to have moved away from this type of an approach now. And there's lots of reasons for it. I mean, many people would not accept, that this study is the end because it doesn't fit a narrative from before. But there's also a lot of effective mitigation measures that people can take these days. And so I think the fact that there are safe and effective vaccines has allowed many people in the political world, including here in Michigan, to kind of walk away from these earlier efforts that, again, according to this study, didn't work anyway and were most disruptive to people, to walk away from those and embrace other types of mitigation efforts. So I'm confident those days are behind us, but it's nice to have confirmation in what we thought all along, which was that asking businesses to close down, to do the lockdown type policies, that they were ineffective before, and hopefully that means that they never happen again.
Agreed. Let's move forward with what we can do to keep ourselves safe. So over the weekend, I saw a jobs report that the country added over 460,000 jobs in January. So I want to talk a little bit about that in conjunction with an issue here in Michigan as it relates to labor and workforce, which is the H-2B visas. So can you kind of talk about both of those items together and share what Michigan can expect this year?
Well, it's actually a welcome sign that we had a jobs report that wasn't as anemic as the ones before. So we've had several in a row that were pretty disappointing. Generally the economy going in the right direction. And a lot of it was difficulty in hiring people. But you remember a few months ago when we were talking about, different impacts, we had some people leave the workforce. We've got issues with just in overall aging workforce, labor force participation rate relatively low. And then on top of that, a lot of people were quitting and moving. So when some people exit the workforce, like workers over age 55, we had a lot of people exit, older workers exit the workforce, created opportunities for younger workers to move up. And so you had record quitting, there's the great resignation as it was called, several months in a row of that. But those are kind of transient impacts that it was expected would kind of settle down. I think that things are in the labor market, there's some hope that maybe they're settling down a little bit. Now, remember, as I still hold the same position as I said last week, it's not going to get easier over the long term. That these are a lot of long-term trends that are hurting us right now, and those are going to continue. But kind of the extraordinary challenges, when you take all the regular challenges and then put the all the movement, 4 million people leaving one place of employment and joining another and creating a lot of extra vacancies, that I think that is starting to settle down a little bit. And so there is it's a good sign. 467,000 is a pretty good number, and hopefully it's an indication of things to come. Now, H-2B visas are really important in Michigan. This is where you have seasonal workers that come for, especially like in the hospitality industry and up north, 4,000 to 5,000 H-2B visas just to run Mackinac Island every year, just to give you an idea of how much we rely on this. There was a demand for 140,000 nationwide. That's how many applications employers made to bring in seasonal workers. And there were 33,000 allocated. So that's devastating to businesses in the tourism industry. You think about like your local carnival and things that are happening in your community when you have that 1 week a year when it showcases the community and the carnival comes to town, and so many communities have that, but those rely heavily on H-2B visas, and the fact that the demand, labor force shortages in general, a lot of employers look into this as an option. Demand 140,000, allocation 33,000. It means if that doesn't get fixed, if that doesn't get changed, it will have very devastating impacts on the tourism industry in northern Michigan, especially. But I single out northern Michigan because I think it's particularly troublesome there. But it's not just northern Michigan. Now there are a lot of kind of levers that can be moved here. The Biden administration could say that, hey, the 33,000 are just new people, and anybody returning that did everything they were supposed to do. They didn't overstay their visa, they didn't get into any trouble or have any criminal activity or anything like that. Everybody who did what they needed, that they were supposed to do, that they can go back and forth on these H-2B visas without counting against the cap. So they could administratively say the cap is just for new returning. If they followed all the rules, can return. That would be a massive, massive help. They can actually change the cap as well. This is not a cap that statute, sets the number on, and so there is some talk. In fact, we've had a member of Congress, Representative Slotkin, on here on this briefing before. She had sent in a letter to the administration asking them to increase that cap 44,000, which would go a long way as well. It wouldn't meet the whole need of the country, but obviously would would go a long way. By the way, employers are in a lottery for these. So the employers entered into a lottery, and then if they get kind of picked out of the hat, I don't know what the mechanism of the lottery is and how they pick, but if they are one of the names picked out of this lottery, then they get some of the visa allocations. If they don't, then they don't. And so it's a really, really big issue. But thankfully, it seems like there's some things starting to move on it, and we'll see if it moves in time. Really, in order to do recruiting and planning and everything you have to do for this, it needs to be settled in March or April at the very latest, in order to have things in the tourism industry in northern Michigan work as they're supposed to.
Well, we'll certainly keep an eye on this. I know it's something that we've been advocating for and talking about for a while now. Brian, we talked a lot about redistricting last week, and there were a few lawsuits that you kind of provided an overview of. What is the latest there?
There was a lawsuit late last week that was dismissed. I think it was actually on Friday. And it was the lawsuit that I thought, actually, if any of them had a chance, it would have been this lawsuit that challenged the way that the district lines for House, Senate, and Congress are drawn in the Detroit area. And the plaintiffs in this case, with a lot of members, current and former members and community members in the Detroit area, that said, hey, you're not going to have as many overall minority, but especially Black legislators based on how these maps are drawn. Therefore, it's a violation of the Voting Rights Act. And I've been through a redistricting process myself in my previous life when I was in public office. And in my reading of the map is that they are drawn illegally, at least if you interpret the Voting Rights Act how it has always been interpreted going back, including by the Obama administration. If you use the Obama administration standards, then these maps are not legal. Now, our redistricting commission took a different approach. Their lawyers said, yeah, but we can interpret it a different way. And it was a way that kind of splits up Detroit more. They perceive that as being more even politically. So you have a better balance between Republicans and Democrats in their view, but it's at the expense of districts that are more likely to elect minority candidates into the legislature and into Congress. And I don't think anybody really disagrees that these maps will, in fact, produce fewer candidates and fewer elected officials who are minorities. That's a given. You can already tell by how the filings are happening that that's going to happen. The question is it illegal? This was put before our Supreme Court and in Michigan, the Michigan Supreme Court. And by a 4-3 decision, the Supreme Court said that they hadn't provided the evidence. Now, our Supreme Court they're not experts in this area. They rely on the plaintiffs to bring the evidence to them and say, here's what we're saying, here's how it's illegal. But instead what they said was, here's the outcome. It's obviously illegal because the outcome is going to produce fewer minority representatives and senators. And what the Supreme Court essentially said back in a 4-3 decision was, you didn't provide evidence. Saying what the outcome is going to be doesn't mean that the process of drawing the lines was illegal. And so you had 3 members of the Supreme Court that dissented and said, yeah, they really didn't provide the evidence, but we think there could be an issue here. We'd like to get our own expert in to do an analysis and make this determination, help us to make the best decision here. So it wasn't really a decision based on the merits of the lines themselves, but rather a decision that the plaintiffs really hadn't brought forth the evidence that was required for them to make a decision based upon. So, to me, that there are other lawsuits, but to me, that was the one that I thought had the best chance based on just on my own experience and reading of it. And so I would say that probably these are the maps that we're gonna have. It'll be a very very competitive season here. We pay close attention to this because we identify pro-small business candidates across the political spectrum, Republicans and Democrats both, and support them as they run for office. And then and then hold them accountable when they are in office. And it's a really important part of what we do. And all the lines are changing. They do every 10 years. And but in this case, it has the potential of changing out maybe 70 or more of the House of Representatives, which have 110 people. So we will have a lot of work on our hands, but you can tune in to our website and to this briefing as we go through this season, and we'll keep you up to date on what's happening.
And I think this is a good time to remind our viewers that we are hosting a virtual meeting about redistricting. We have a panel ready. This is on March 1st. It is exclusively available to our VIP and elite members. So if that's you and you don't have the link yet, you can email spam@spam.org and we'll get it to you. If you're not, it's not too late to become a member at one of those levels and attend. So I think it'll be a really informative event. All right, so there's a couple of headlines that I think are interesting that go together. One is that private school enrollment in Michigan is up. And the other is a pretty big number related to education funding in the budget. So what are you hearing there?
Over the weekend, we started hearing the kind of controlled leaks. This always happens with, something big coming up. So the governor's going to unveil a budget coming up this week. And ahead of that, they'll place news stories with media throughout the state that kind of give little teasers. And usually what you do is, and all governors do this, but usually what you do is you pull out some things that you think will be particularly popular, and you give them to your favorite newspaper. So in this case, you can tell that the Whitmer's administration's favorite newspaper is the Free Press, the Detroit Free Press, because they're the ones who got the advance on a few things. So education is what they they leaked out or provided ahead of time. And so there are several aspects to this. Part of it is just the overall increase. There's a big increase. The state does have a lot of money. Remember all the money that the federal government sent to people. So they sent some to states. They also sent it to people, but people did what? They bought stuff. And when you buy stuff, you pay sales tax, and sales tax revenue is what funds schools. It's the biggest part of what funds schools. So so there's a lot more money pouring into the school aid fund right now than has ever happened, by a lot. It's not even close. It's so far above what has ever been experienced before. There will be a $18.4 billion education budget this time presented. Now, so let's go through the legislature. That represents about a 7.6% overall increase. And last year's was a record large as well, because remember, this pandemic impact is 2 years now. So it's a big increase, but it's a big increase over last year's. And the part that's kind of novel in it, so they're going to do a per pupil increase, and it'll be all the way up to $9,135 as the minimum foundation allowance amount that schools get per child. But they're also going to start, they're going to propose to make retention payments to teachers. So if a teacher stays a teacher this year, they'll get a bonus, and then that bonus goes up each year for a few more years. So that's the novel part, the part that's different than before, and a recognition that the governor doesn't believe that this revenue stream will be permanently up, that it's up right now and it's probably going to come back down. So these retention payments are something that is a one-time thing, or in this case, they're proposed for 3 years, but they're not like permanently to be paid on into the future. So we do know, though, that there also has been a lot of movement between schools. I mean, we have schools of choice in Michigan between public schools. So there's been people that have moved their kids from one place to another. In some cases, because they want to move away from schools that are very strict, and other times people want to move to schools that are very strict when it comes to the COVID protocol. So there's been kind of movement around, but one of the big winners appears to be private schools. So for those families that can afford private school, are taking that option more than ever. And we see, well, maybe not more than ever, but more than recent history. And I thought there was an interesting article in MLive about Grand Rapids. So the Catholic schools in Grand Rapids saw more than 8% increase, which is very, very, very high. I mean, if you look at the overall enrollment in public schools, has been in a downward trend over the last decade. So, and it's just the demographics, the number of kids that are school age in our state has been stagnant or declining. And so if the public schools are getting more, then they're coming from somewhere, and that somewhere is probably, if the private schools are getting more, it's coming from public schools. So a lot of interesting dynamics that are happening. For our part, though, we have two big interests in the reason that we get so involved in school issues. First is the future workforce. I mean, people need to be able to leave the education system ready to take the next step in their career or education, and so having a successful workforce depends on having a successful education system. But then also, when school is not readily available across the landscape, it causes a lot of childcare problems for families and workers, those who make small businesses go. And so these are a couple of big areas that we continue to focus on. Scope of issues that SBM works on, while we consider them all to be business issues, some are kind of peripheral issues that aren't maybe core business issues, but have a big impact on our members and their employees. And education policy, another one of those areas where I think that you can hear a lot more about it in the coming weeks. And when we I'm not going to be, we're going to have Rob Fowler back on Thursday. I won't be able to be on the briefing on Thursday. I've got an issue with my eye. They're going to shoot some lasers into it, but so I won't be here, but Rob is going to be back. And so you and Rob will handle the briefing, and I'm pretty excited for everybody to see Rob's new and improved look. He hasn't been gone that long, but he looks different, to just kind of put a pin in that. So thank you everybody for watching the briefing today.
Yes, thank you for watching. I will be back here with Rob on Thursday. Have a great week, and we'll see you then.